Imagine walking into a place of business where you're invisible, not because of who you are, but because of who they think you aren't. No raised voices, no threats, just one quiet act of disrespect. That moment became a catalyst for exposure, for transformation, for a reckoning not with noise, but with truth. This isn't a story about revenge, it's about revelation and the power of staying composed in the face of systemic bias. You're about to hear how a man underestimated at every turn became the turning point for an institution. This is not fiction. It's a new kind of real, one that doesn't shout but echoes. Hit subscribe, stay to the end, because what begins with silence ends with change. It began with a sound so small, most people would have missed it. A faint slap against polished marble. Subtle, intentional, and loud enough to echo through everything that followed. A young teller, barely out of her 20s, stood behind thick glass, her expression fixed in polite detachment. She reached for an ID card handed across the counter, held it for a second longer than necessary, then released it, let it fall. The card spun once in the air, skated slightly, and landed just short of a man's polished brogues. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just bent down slowly, picked it up, and placed it back into the inner pocket of his blazer. The lobby was quiet, too quiet, the type of quiet that has weight, the kind that tells you everyone saw what happened and chose not to speak. Not yet. He stood out, not because he was loud, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't. In a room built to spotlight power, his silence made people uncomfortable. His skin was dark, his jacket was light, his eyes steady. He carried an envelope, uncreased, sealed. Everything about him said preparation, but everything around him responded with suspicion. Houston's Riverway. District was known for glass lobbies, glass offices, glass intentions. You could see everything, and yet nothing was clear. The bank here, Alton West, prided itself on elegance. It smelled of citrus cleaner and ambition, the kind of place where silence is the dress code and courtesy is currency. But this morning, that silence cracked. Not in the room, but in the man. His name was Jeremiah Cole, and what had just happened was not his first slight. But it would be the last one ignored. He didn't storm out. He didn't speak. Instead, he waited, watched, let the moment settle. A teller across the room greeted a man in a cobalt suit with a handshake. Another client, a woman wearing pearls and power, was offered bottled water and a private office. Jeremiah, standing just feet away, received a blank stare. He was 43, born in Baton Rouge, the kind of man who knew exactly when to speak, and exactly when silence made more impact. He adjusted the envelope in his hands, pressed the seams flat, and moved to the end of the line. Again. The receptionist barely glanced at him when he arrived earlier. She had asked for his purpose. He had said, "Business deposit." She nodded slowly. Not a greeting, more like an evaluation, as if deciding whether to believe him. Behind her, a quote etched in metal read, "We build trust, one relationship at a time." He read it twice and smiled, quietly. Trust, he knew, wasn't built here. It was tested, especially when your suit didn't come with a name tag or a famous logo, especially when your ID didn't match expectations, especially when your face didn't match the deposit. But today, Jeremiah wasn't here for validation. He was here for clarity, for proof. Not that he belonged, but that he never needed permission to. So he stood, patient, composed, waiting for the second attempt, for the second glance, and maybe finally a second chance to be seen, not for what they assumed, but for who he was and for what he had built. Because sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest truths, and sometimes a single ID on a marble floor is the start of an earthquake. He had the kind of walk that didn't hurry, not because he moved slow, but because he didn't need to prove he belonged. Jeremiah Cole wasn't new to this, not to banks, not to questions, not to being watched twice as long and greeted half as often. He'd learned long ago that presence doesn't come from volume. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and never shrinking from it. He was 43, too young to be underestimated, too seasoned to be dismissed. Born and raised in Baton Rouge, educated in Houston, a man who built his company the long way. No angel investors, no shortcuts, just contracts won through grit, nights spent on job sites, and a Rolodex full of people who trusted his name, even if they'd never seen his face. His company, Mariner Infrastructure Group, wasn't flashy, but it was solid. And now, thanks to a long-fought bid, was at the center of a $1.9 billion transportation renewal plan stretching from the Gulf to the capital. The kind of project that involved state agencies, regional banks, and contractors all speaking in the coded language of procurement, and Jeremiah spoke that language fluently. Even if others acted like he needed a translator, he had come to Alton West that day on purpose. No driver, no assistant, just one man, one envelope, and one certified check. He wanted to see how the system worked when no one whispered ahead that he was important. Turns out it worked exactly as he feared. The receptionist greeted him with a half look. No warmth, no name, just protocol. "When now we see," he said, "business deposit." Her lips tightened slightly, as if the words needed translating. She handed him a numbered slip. He stood in a lobby designed to impress. Brass fixtures, marble inlay, floor-to-ceiling windows letting in a sun that made everything shimmer, except the people. A young man in slacks and a bright lanyard was called forward. A woman in a designer suit was offered a seat and sparkling water. Jeremiah watched. It all without judgment, just notes. He believed in evidence, and in letting people show you who they really are. When his number flashed on the screen, he approached the counter. Chelsea was her name. He read it on the little pin beside her shoulder. She didn't look up immediately, just said, "ID, please," without a smile. He placed it gently on the counter, followed by the envelope. She looked at the name, then at him, then back again. "What's this for?" she asked. "Business deposit," he repeated. Her eyebrows raised. She opened the envelope, saw the check, $150,000, certified, labeled, lined with codes only a bank would understand. Her fingers hovered. "You have any other ID?" she asked. He shook. His head once. "That one's valid, issued by the state, unexpired." She picked it up by the very edge, held it up to the light like a counterfeit bill, said nothing for 10 seconds that felt like 30, then whispered to the teller beside her, a glance, a smirk. Jeremiah saw it all. He said nothing. Chelsea turned back. "We'll need to verify this," she said. He nodded. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "It's just protocol," she replied, then walked away with his ID. Left him standing at the counter, hands folded, alone. A man behind him cleared his throat. A woman behind that man shifted her purse, but no one spoke. The room went on. Phones rang, forms shuffled, small. Talk bubbled at the other windows, and Jeremiah stood still, not because he had no place to be, but because this was the place he needed to be seen, exactly as he was, exactly how they refused to. The seconds passed slowly. Jeremiah stood in front of the teller window, empty-handed now. No ID, no check, just space where his presence was treated like suspicion. Chelsea hadn't looked back at him, hadn't offered a time frame, hadn't acknowledged his patience, just vanished behind the glass door, carrying everything that validated his reason for standing there. He looked around. No one met his eyes. A couple near the exit whispered softly. A teenage boy tapped away at his phone. 2 older men, in golf caps, laughed about traffic and tea times. The world moved, but for Jeremiah, time had paused. 10 minutes passed. Still nothing. Chelsea finally returned. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look relieved. She just looked done. "There's no account matching this check in our system," she said flatly. Jeremiah blinked once. I have an existing account, he replied, calm but clear. It was active just 3 days ago. He pulled out a printed deposit slip, placed it carefully on the counter. She squinted at it, then smirked. Are you sure this is real? Her voice was coated in disbelief. Not curiosity, not caution. Disbelief. Jeremiah nodded. It's a certified check, issued by the Treasury branch of the Texas Transportation Board. Her expression didn't change. She looked over his shoes, then up at his collar, then back down to the check. What kind of business did you say this was? Contracting, infrastructure. We're part of a consortium handling public transit redevelopment. We just completed work on a highway loop in East Harris. She nodded slowly, but not out of understanding, out of performance. Then she leaned toward the neighboring teller, Paige, according to her badge. They spoke in hushed tones, but the smiles weren't subtle. Paige looked over at him, laughed into her. Palm Jeremiah watched. He didn't speak, didn't shift. He just watched. Chelsea returned to the keyboard, typed with 2 fingers. Each keystroke sounded louder than it should have. She didn't explain what she was doing, didn't ask for clarification. Finally, she said, "The system's still not finding any account under your name." He nodded. "Yesterday, I was told there was a processing delay. They advised me to bring documentation." He pushed forward a neatly organized packet, invoices, project timelines, client letters. She flipped through them like reading a menu she wasn't planning to order from. Paused, then sighed. Only one client listed? Yes. It's a new contract, her brow lifted, as if the word new was a red flag. She turned and dialed the internal phone, asked for a manager, mentioned an unusual deposit. Jeremiah waited, again. He heard the clicking of nails on glass, the whisper of designer heels across tile, the ooey hum of music drifting from the lobby speakers. He stood still. Chelsea looked up. "The manager will be out shortly," then added, "In the meantime, would you mind stepping aside? We'd like to assist the next guest." She smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was the kind you wear when you want someone gone. Jeremiah looked past her. The line had grown. 3 more people now waited. 2 in business attire, 1 in athleisure with diamond-studded sunglasses. No one had been asked to step aside before. He picked up his documents, moved slowly, and stood near the trash can. Still waiting. Still watching. He could have left, would have been easy. Just walk out the same doors he entered. Let the smirks win, let the doubts stay unanswered. But Jeremiah wasn't built like that. He stayed. Because that's what presence does. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply doesn't disappear. 15 minutes had passed since the manager was called. Still no one had come. No explanation, no apology. Just more clients moving past. Man in loafers and a Rolex smiled and joked with his teller. A woman carrying a Prada clutch deposited an even larger check. No questions, no extra ID, no waiting. Then finally, a man appeared. Gray suit, balding slightly at the crown, polished shoes. He walked with speed but not urgency, stopped just short of Jeremiah. "Mr. Cole?" Jeremiah nodded. "Yes, I'm Brian Latham, branch manager. I understand there's been a question regarding your deposit." Jeremiah offered the envelope again. Same documents, same ID, same certified check. Latham took them, scanned quickly, then paused at the letterhead. Texas Transportation Board. He cleared his throat. "Would you mind waiting just a moment? I'd like to confirm something with our operations team." Jeremiah nodded. Again, another wait. Latham disappeared behind frosted glass. 10 more minutes, maybe 15. Chelsea and Paige never looked up. Clients kept being served. Jeremiah just stood there, by the trash can, in silence, again. Latham returned, handed back the envelope. No smile, no welcome. "I'm sorry, but we won't be able to process this today." Jeremiah looked him in the eye. "Why not?" "We're unable to verify the issuing source with sufficient certainty." It's a certified government check. Yes, Latham said, but the associated account doesn't meet our internal validation requirements. Jeremiah's jaw flexed slightly. And what does that mean exactly? Latham hesitated. We're not able to disclose the specifics of internal thresholds, but you're declining a valid deposit. It's about due diligence, sir. You're welcome to visit another branch. That was the moment. The one where some men yell, others storm out. Jeremiah did neither. He gathered the envelope, pressed the seal closed with calm fingers, turned, and walked slowly toward the door. As he reached it, a voice rang out, not loud, but sharp enough. Chelsea. Next time, sir, maybe try dressing more professionally. A few heads turned. Laughter. Not loud, but cruel. Jeremiah paused. One foot still inside, one outside. He didn't look back, just walked forward, out into the light. The marble, closing behind him like a whisper. He didn't plan to come back so soon, but something about the way the door closed behind him that day, soft and final, made it feel unfinished, like a sentence cut short, like a chapter without punctuation. So Jeremiah returned, 3 days later. Same time, same envelope, different resolve. This time he pressed his shirt more carefully, selected a darker blazer, shined his shoes until the leather reflected light like glass. Not because he needed to, but because he understood what they saw. And what? They refused to. As he stepped through the doors, the scent hit him first. Citrus polish, pine disinfectant, and something colder. Judgment masked as professionalism. The receptionist glanced up. She recognized him, and for a second she hesitated, then looked back down, pretending she hadn't seen him at all. Jeremiah moved toward the teller line, only 2 people ahead of him, a man in his 50s talking loudly about market indexes, and a younger woman on her phone, tapping through Instagram filters. Neither noticed him, but the staff did. Paige whispered something to Chelsea. They didn't smile this time. They didn't laugh. They just watched. When his turn came, it wasn't Chelsea who called him forward. It was a young man, new face, polished demeanor, slightly nervous smile. Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today? Jeremiah placed the envelope on the counter. Same deposit as before. All supporting documents are included. The young man opened the folder, reviewed silently, then looked up. Would you mind if I checked with my manager? Jeremiah nodded. Please do. The teller disappeared through the same door Latham had used. The glass shimmered. Behind him, someone chuckled. He didn't look, didn't move. He had learned long ago. Silence can speak louder than protest. Chelsea's voice floated across the counter. Always the same stories, checks that don't add up. She didn't whisper this time. She wanted him to hear. Paige smirked. A man in line behind him leaned toward another client. You'd think they'd learn. Another laugh. Jeremiah's fists stayed. Open, his posture steady, unmoving, unbothered on the outside. On the inside, heat, burning beneath the collar. The teller returned, holding the folder carefully. He looked uncertain. Mr. Cole, our manager isn't comfortable proceeding without more documentation. What documentation is missing? The teller looked down, then back up. He didn't specify. Jeremiah nodded. I've provided government contracts, certified invoices, and a verified check. I know, sir. I'm truly sorry. Jeremiah took the folder, slowly, deliberately. As he turned to leave, the check slipped, floated down, softly, like a leaf surrendering to wind. It hit the floor. Someone coughed behind him. Chelsea's voice again. If the boots are too tight, we've got a bench he can use. Laughter. Bitter. Stifled. Cruel. Jeremiah bent, picked up, stood tall, then walked out. This time there was no hesitation, no second glance, just a door and a decision forming behind it. The silence after his exit didn't last long. By the end of the day, 3 emails had already circulated, not public, but internal. Subject lines marked urgent and flagged client interaction. A meeting was scheduled for 8:30 the next Morning, attendance mandatory. Behind closed doors, they replayed the footage. Multiple angles. Sound off. But the body language said enough. Paige laughing. Chelsea's smirk. Latham's neutrality. And Jeremiah, composed. Precise. Unmoved. The regional manager, Philip Mays, had flown in from Austin. He was tall, mid-50s, and carried the kind of voice that made people listen before he spoke. He watched every second of the tape without blinking. When it ended, no one. Then he said 4 words. Who authorized this denial? No one answered. Compliance was brought in. So was legal. Not because Jeremiah had filed a complaint. He hadn't. But because the signature on that check didn't just belong to a client. It belonged to the Deputy Director of Infrastructure Financing. Someone. The bank worked with. Someone they couldn't afford to ignore. By noon, Chelsea was placed on leave. Paige was given a formal warning. Latham was told to submit a written report by end of day. And HR started pulling call logs, transaction records, and other cases that looked similar. Jeremiah never knew about the meeting. He didn't need to. He had his own schedule. He spent the morning walking the job site of a new light rail installation, greeted welders, spoke with planners, ate lunch from a paper box on the hood of a truck, still in his pressed shirt, still, with the envelope in the passenger seat. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a second number, this time a text. Mr. Cole, this is Regional Director Mays from Alton West. Would appreciate the opportunity to speak at your convenience. He read it once, then again, then put his phone away. He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest message isn't what you say, it's what you choose not to answer. Meanwhile, the branch shifted, subtle changes first. Greeter. Retrained. New signage about anti-discrimination policy. Client evaluations conducted via third party. But behind the scenes, the fear had taken hold. Not fear of Jeremiah, fear of what he represented. Accountability with receipts, and silence too powerful to dismiss. It wasn't long before rumors reached other branches. Staff whispered about the man in the linen blazer. The one with the envelope, the one who never raised his voice and still shook the floor. Jeremiah didn't call back, didn't email, didn't reply with a carefully worded message. Instead, he made another call of his own. Not to the bank, but to the state comptroller's office. A simple request. A redirect of escrow accounts for the remaining contract disbursements to another bank. One that had been waiting for an opportunity. One that understood what respect looked like and what it required. The shift wasn't loud. No press release. No public memo. Just a wire transfer. $87 million moved out of Alton West's reach overnight. Without explanation, without warning. Inside the bank, no one said it aloud, but they knew. They felt it. The way you feel cold air when a door has been left open too long. The numbers told the story, and the numbers didn't lie. Philip Mays called a second time. Still no answer. This time, he left a voicemail. Mr. Cole, we understand a mistake was made. I'd appreciate a conversation. Jeremiah played it once, deleted it, then moved on. He was never looking for revenge, only clarity. And now he had it, in the form of silence, from the people who once doubted him, and in the form of partnership, from the ones who didn't. At the office, his team asked no questions. They had heard fragments of what happened. But Jeremiah wasn't interested in storytelling. He was interested in systems, and how to build them better. That week, he launched a pilot, a mentorship initiative. Quietly aimed at small business owners who had been overlooked, ignored, or mishandled. Not to speak on his behalf, but to prevent another him from needing to stand that silently again. The first workshop filled in under an hour, not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. Proof that grace doesn't mean surrender, that professionalism isn't submission, and that dignity, once denied, always returns stronger. Inside Alton West, Philip Mays scheduled a third call, this time with legal. They wanted to avoid headlines, avoid escalation. They prepared a formal letter. It said the words regret and unfortunate more than once. It was never sent. Because they knew. It was. Too late for words. Chelsea never returned to the branch. Page transferred. Latham was quietly reassigned. The desk where Jeremiah had once stood remained empty for days. Some said it was coincidence. Others called it sacred, like a reminder that even the invisible leave shadows. Chelsea didn't see it coming. Not the leave notice, not the HR interview, not the silence that followed. She had always believed that confidence was protection, but the cameras didn't lie. Neither did the pattern. Too many transactions flagged. Too many customers questioned, and all of them looked more like Jeremiah than not. In the HR room, she tried to explain. It wasn't personal, she said. I just followed the script. But the script didn't tell her to smirk, didn't tell her to whisper, didn't tell her to treat someone like fiction. Her interview lasted 35 minutes. The consequences? Longer. She wasn't fired. Not exactly, but her contract wasn't renewed, and she didn't fight it. Because somewhere between the interview and the empty desk, it hit her. She had become a headline without the headline. Page left shortly after. Her departure quieter, but not without weight. She enrolled in a professional ethics seminar, voluntarily, said she needed to reflect, said maybe she'd been too passive, too complicit, too comfortable, watching without intervening. Meanwhile, back at Mariner Group, things were changing. Jeremiah expanded the mentorship pilot into a quarterly series, invited voices from different industries, not just executives, but clerks, planners, field engineers. Each session filled faster than the last. Word had spread, not because he advertised, but because people remembered how it felt to be overlooked. The bank, in response, doubled down. New training modules, new oversight, external consultants, all the motions of reform. But not everyone believed it, because true change isn't printed, it's practiced, and trust once broken renews slowly, if at all. Latham transferred to a less visible role. Compliance liaison. No clients, no lobby, just policy. He told colleagues he preferred the quiet, but the truth sat heavier than silence. He had misjudged demand, and the cost had echoed through marble walls. Jeremiah never called attention to the fallout. He never named names. He never needed to, because the system had already spoken, not in press, but in consequences, in transfers, in trainings, in the eyes of staff who now looked longer, spoke softer, and questioned their own assumptions before questioning a client. The emails started slowly. One from a junior rep, another from someone in compliance, short, polite, almost careful. We're sorry for how things unfolded. We understand now. If there's anything we can do. Jeremiah didn't delete them. But he didn't reply either, not because he was angry, but because he was busy. Busy building something that didn't require permission or apology. The mentorship series became a foundation, literally. He filed the paperwork, hired a small team, gave it a name, Foundry, because that's what it was, a place where fire forged better tools, stronger ones built for those who never got a blueprint. Applications came in from everywhere, small towns, big cities, first-time founders, veterans trying to pivot, people who looked like Jeremiah, and people who didn't, all with the same story, I just need a fair shot. Foundry gave them more than that. It gave them language, strategy, confidence, a network. And for some, it gave them their first real contract. Meanwhile, Alton West tried to save face, a new press initiative, a campaign featuring diverse client stories, #equity, #inclusion. But it didn't land, because when a system scrambles to rebrand, people can smell the fear and the guilt. Jeremiah's name began to appear in unlikely places, not news articles, not viral threads, but internal memos, invitations, conference, rosters, Would Mr. Cole be available to speak about equitable procurement? Could Foundry lead a session on community-led contracts? He said no, more often than not, because he wasn't looking for applause. He was building a pipeline, one that didn't need a spotlight. One afternoon, a mid-level manager from the bank reached out, not by email, but in person. He showed up at a Foundry session, sat quietly in the back, took notes, listened, didn't introduce himself until after the session ended, and when he did, he didn't offer excuses. He asked a question. What should we be doing differently? Jeremiah looked at him, then pointed to the people still mingling. Start by listening to the ones who never got the meeting. Then he walked away. No fanfare, no lecture, just truth. Simple, undeniable, and finally heard. He never raised his voice, never posted, never went viral, but his story traveled, from boardrooms to classrooms to government roundtables. No hashtags, no headlines, just impact. It started with a whisper. Did you hear what happened at Alton West? Then came the reflection. What if we've done the same? By the time the year closed, Jeremiah's name had been mentioned in 3 national financial symposiums, twice in white papers, once in a keynote. And yet, he never spoke. Not until he was ready. Not until he was asked. Not to justify, but to guide. The city's annual Equity and Innovation Summit invited him, not just to attend, to open the keynote, the first voice. He stood behind the podium, black-collared shirt, no tie, clean lines, unapologetic. The room stilled, no music, no fanfare, just breath and attention. He looked across the crowd, some familiar faces, many strangers, but every eye locked, waiting, ready. He didn't start with his story. He started with a question. What would our cities look like if we believed people the first time they told us who they were? The silence after was thick, still, beautiful. Then he spoke. Not loud, but firm. And when he finished, there was no standing ovation, no wild applause, just stillness, reverent, grateful, real. That night he walked home, no camera crew, no interviews, just him. And the quiet he had earned, the quiet that followed dignity reclaimed. In the following months, things shifted, not drastically but meaningfully. Forms were redesigned, bank procedures reviewed. One branch added a client advocate, another launched a listening session program. And Foundry, it expanded, added apprenticeships, partnerships, full-time fellows. Not in Jeremiah's name, but in the name of the ones who came next, because that was the point. He never wanted to be the face. He wanted to be the door, open, unassuming, and impossible to close once stepped through. Sometimes the loudest thing a person can say is nothing at all. Sometimes the most transformative power isn't found in shouts, but in steady footsteps through doors they said you didn't belong in. Jeremiah never demanded attention. He demanded fairness, and in doing so, he became impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, share it. Not for clicks, not for trends, but because someone you know might need to see what's possible. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? And more importantly, what will you do when it's your turn to speak? Until then, stay aware, stay kind, and never underestimate the quiet ones. This is Celebrity Undercover Stories, and this was just the beginning.